Imagine in this very instant you are poised upon the inward threshold, not of some distant achievement, but of a quiet seismic shift in identity. The air, though still, vibrates with the silent imminence of transformation. You sense it. Something within is gathering itself, preparing to pierce the veil of familiar circumstance. Yet this is not the trembling before a leap into the unknown. It is the silent certainty of awakening to what has always been awaiting your recognition. What happens in consciousness at such a precipice? The old voice, the one that whispered of conditions, effort, striving, begins to falter. In its place, an atmosphere of fullness emerges. Not the fullness of acquisition, but the fullness of being. You are not reaching, you are radiating. You do not seek, you reveal. It is not a question of whether you will become successful, but whether you will accept that success, in its truest sense, has always been your nature. This is the moment when the inner dialogue shifts, the familiar rehearsal of inadequacies, the anxious scanning for evidence, the silent bargaining with fate begins to dissolve. In its place, a subtle, dignified knowing arises. You no longer ask, will this happen for me, but rather, what would it feel like right now to know it is already done? This is the axis upon which the law of assumption turns. It is not a mechanical process, not a ritual of repetition or empty affirmation. It is the movement of identity, the quiet embrace of being, not the restless doing. The world has taught you to chase, to perform, to accumulate credentials and proofs. But in this tradition, the law of assumption, you are invited to stand, not to run, to embody, not to pursue, to assume, not to strive. What is it to live in the end? It is not to wait for the world to give you permission. It is not to stand outside the banquet of life, hoping to be invited in. It is to walk through the door of your own consciousness, to take your seat at the table of fulfillment, and to eat, as one entitled by right of being. You do not fill the plate by pleading with circumstance. You fill it by knowing you are the host. Living in the end is a stance, a way of being that precedes proof, that does not require the world's agreement. It is to feel the wish fulfilled, to let that feeling so saturate your inner world that the outer reality has no choice but to echo back the song you are already singing within. Most wander the corridors of life reacting to appearances, believing that circumstance is cause and self is effect. But here you are shown a deeper law. Your sustained assumption, the state you consistently dwell in, organizes the world around you. The difference is not in the mechanism. The difference is in the direction of belief. For the law of assumption is always at work, as surely as gravity. Whether you know it or not, whether you direct it or not, your reality is shaped by your dominant inner stance. The only question is, will you assume deliberately? Will you become the conscious director of your own experience or remain a passive recipient of reflected circumstance? Consider the parable of the seed and the ground. The ground does not judge the seed. It does not say, this is wheat, this is thorn, this is oak. I will only nurture the one I prefer. The ground brings forth whatever is planted and sustained within it. Your imagination is the fertile ground. Your assumption is the seed. You do not need to beg the ground to grow the seed. You simply assume the harvest. Most, however, plant seeds of lack, water them daily with worry, and are surprised when the harvest is meager. But the law is impartial. It is not kindness or cruelty, but certainty. What you consistently and dominantly assume in feeling must be reflected in your world. Perhaps now you sense the difference between seeking and radiating. Seeking is the posture of lack. It says, I do not have, so I must find. Radiating is the posture of fullness. It says, I am, so I reveal. You are not a beggar at the gates of life, but the life itself, expressing through form. The world of appearances may tempt you to doubt, to react, to adjust yourself to its demands, but the inner mechanics are clear. As you change your inner conversation, as you persist in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the outer must conform. It cannot do otherwise, for it is the shadow of your sustained self-concept. Now let us speak of revision, this sacred art so often misunderstood. Revision is not the erasure of fact, but the reordering of inner meaning. When you revise, you do not deny what has happened, but you refuse to let it dictate your identity. Imagine a painter dissatisfied with the stroke upon the canvas. Does she abandon the painting? No, she overlays, refines, transforms the image until it matches her vision. So, too, you may take any memory, any event, and revise it in imagination until your inner world reflects your chosen identity. The past is not fixed. It is a living narrative shaped by your assumption in the present. Revision is the proclamation. I am not bound by what has been. I am free to decree what is. How does this operate? When you revise, the inner dialogue changes. The sting of old memories softens. The weight of regret lifts. Outer events, which once seemed to echo the old story, begin to reorganize. People respond differently. Opportunities arise unbidden. The world, ever the faithful mirror, reflects the new stance you have claimed. This is not performance. It is embodiment. It is not the repetition of hollow words, but the quiet assumption of a new self. You do not try to make the world conform. You simply remain faithful to your inner vision, and the world, compelled by the law, must follow. Let us move now to Sats, the state akin to sleep. Here, in the twilight world between waking and dreaming, you find the door to the subconscious wide open. This is the sacred interval where the seeds of assumption are most easily sown. In SATS, you are neither striving nor resisting. You are not chasing success, you are living it inwardly. You do not argue with appearances. You rest in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. The body is still, the mind is quiet, and the inner scene plays with vivid reality. You do not ask, how will this come to pass? You simply accept, it is done. As you dwell in SATS, the lines between inner and outer begin to blur. The subconscious, unguarded and receptive, accepts your assumption as fact. No effort, no struggle, no striving. Only the gentle persistence of feeling real what you desire to be real. This is the difference between doing and being. Doing is the frantic movement of the outer man, forever chasing, forever unsatisfied. Being is the serene stillness of the inner man, forever fulfilled, forever radiating. In SATS, you do not plant seeds of hope or doubt. You plant seeds of certainty, and certainty, sustained, becomes evidence in time. Imagination creates reality. This is not metaphor, but law. The world you see is but the outer crust of your sustained imagination. You are not a passive observer tossed about by circumstance. You are the imaginer, the one who decrees and compels. Every image, every inner conversation, every assumption, no matter how trivial, is a seed planted in the ground of being. The world, with all its seeming resistance, is but the reflection of your sustained identity. You do not wait for proof. You do not demand signs. You know that what you consistently imagine must, by law, appear. Reality is not a contest of effort, but a revelation of being. You are not the victim of circumstance, nor the puppet of fate. You are the cause, the root, the center from which all flows. The law of assumption does not ask permission. It does not require validation from the world. It operates in secret, in silence, in the hidden chambers of the heart. When you persist in the assumption of your chosen self, the world bends, reorganizes, conspires to reveal what you have already claimed within. You do not manipulate the outer, you claim the inner. You do not chase after effects, you stand in the cause. This is not arrogance, but humility before the law. For to assume is to accept your place at the center of your own universe. Consider the story of a man worn by years of striving, who at last ceased to chase after success. He sat quietly and asked himself, what would it feel like right now to know I am successful? He let the feeling rise, not as hope, but as certainty. He rehearsed no plans, made no bargains, sought no guarantees. He simply assumed the feeling and let it saturate his being. In days, opportunities arose, doors opened, people who had ignored him now sought his counsel. The world, which had been a cold arena, became a welcoming garden. What changed? Not the world, but the man. Not the facts, but the assumption. This is the law at work, impartial, unwavering, dependable. You are always assuming. This is the inescapable truth. The question is not if you are using the law, but how. Most drift in unconscious assumption. reacting to the world, believing that what they see is all there is. But you are called to a higher stance, to assume deliberately, to direct the inner dialogue, to claim your identity as the imaginer. When you cease to react and begin to create, the world becomes plastic, malleable, obedient to the hand of assumption. Doubt gives way to faith. Lack yields to fullness. Seeking transforms into radiating. You do not perform for the world. You embody your chosen self. The world, in time, must reflect the change. Let us for a moment reflect on the mechanics of this transformation. When you assume a new identity, the inner dialogue shifts. The questions you ask yourself change. No longer do you wonder, how will it happen? But rather, what would it feel like to know it is done? The tone of your self-talk becomes gentle, assured, unwavering. You find that reactions to old triggers soften. The urge to defend or justify fades. There is a calm, unshakable knowing, a stance that does not bend before appearances. Outer events, once stubborn and unyielding, begin to move, to rearrange, to mirror the new state. People, circumstances, opportunities, all conspire to reveal what you have accepted within. Now consider the difference between proof and knowing. Proof is the demand of the senses. Show me, and then I will believe. Knowing is the quiet authority of the Spirit. I believe, and therefore it must be shown. You do not wait for the world to convince you. You convince yourself inwardly and let the world follow. This is not naive optimism, but the highest realism. For the world, as you experience it, is nothing but the outpicturing of your sustained self-concept. You do not need to perform, to persuade, to strive. You simply remain faithful to your assumption, and the law, which cannot fail, does the rest. The final movement is this: test the law. Do not take these words on faith alone. Choose now an assumption worthy of your true self. Take it into the silence. Feel it as real. Let it saturate your being. Persist without impatience, without anxiety. Let the world reveal what you have already claimed within. You are not seeking, you are radiating. You are not chasing, you are attracting. You are not reacting, you are creating. The law is sure, the promise certain. Your sustained assumption, embodied in feeling, must be made manifest. Remain faithful and watch as the world, in its own perfect order, reveals the success that has always been yours.